Hey, welcome to another exciting edition of the Standing for Freedom podcast. This is a special edition. I'm joined by my friend Mike O'Fallon, who is the founder of Sovereign Nations. He is also the architect behind New Discourses. Hey, Mike, welcome.
Good to be here.
Hey, it's great to see you. And I think about all the things that are going on right now in this country and around the world. Big events. There have been sweeping changes, and then there is resistance to that change. And we talk about sort of the culture that is, or the culture that was, and this whole new cultural revolution that is taking place.
Yes, that's well stated.
Causing concerns both inside and outside the church. You and I were at a conference more recently in Memphis, Tennessee at Mid-America Seminary, of course, Liberty University here in Lynchburg, Virginia, founded in 1971 by Dr. Jerry Falwell Sr., who was never shy when it came to the culture wars. He believed in the gospel of Jesus Christ, but he also believed in engaging the culture, not only for Christ, but also in politics. He understood that we must disciple the nations. As we look at everything that is happening in our culture today, what are the things that cause you the biggest concern?
Well, I think across every spectrum right now that you would have in terms of looking at affinity groups, looking at corporations, looking at education, looking at political life, looking at faiths, and that would be within the umbrella of affinity groups, is that you have the same move that's basically happening. And that move is that you are basically trying to take out what was the objective things that those organizations were built upon, whether it be a corporation, about profit, and about making good things or supplying good services and so forth. Well, all of a sudden it's turned ideologically political and always politically left. The same thing could be said about education. Well, once you had the School of Medicine or the School of Geography or anything else, all of a sudden those objective things that they were teaching for so long, or even math, such as 2 + 2 = 4, well, all of a sudden it's turned political and those objective things are turned to subjective, and now you have 5. At the same time, within faith, we can say specifically within Christianity, but it's happening within all major faiths, is there's a move that is taking what was the truth claims of those faiths, let's say of Christianity, and now you're moving to something that is radically subjective, something that is actually changing the very meaning, the foundations by which those faiths were built. So one of the examples that when we were talking at this, it was a conference for the Conservative Baptist Network. And when we were discussing this on stage, you and I and another gentleman by the name of Rod Martin, Brad Jerkovich, when we were having this discussion, I said, what you need to see is that within everything, there is the move from what was something, the real, to a simulacrum of what was real. And what I mean is that it's something that is hyper-real. It's a simulation of what was, that is still pretending to be that thing that was built upon objective standards. So in essence, one of the examples that I gave to understand what a simulacra is, or a simulacrum, is thinking of a strawberry, right? And Local Distance actually came up with this analogy. He's a gentleman who's on Twitter, a brilliant guy. But if you think about this, kind of go back in mind, so if you're thinking about how the churches has changed, let's say that if you're somebody who's watching this right now and you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you're a boomer, or you're someone who's Gen X, things have changed radically. So, but think about it from this perspective. Let's say that 70 years ago, a father takes out his son, a grandfather, let's say, takes out his son to the family strawberry farm. And it's the thing that they've done that's helped to keep them in business, has given them a living and so forth. And 70 years ago, he reaches down and he says, grandson, I want you to taste the best strawberry you'll ever have in your life. He gives it to his grandson, he bites into it, and the grandson was amazed. This is the family strawberry. And that grandson was so amazed by the taste of the strawberry, so blown away by it, that he spent then his childhood life and then as a young adult to get his degree in business, and then to come back and really try to make that strawberry farm profitable. And so the first thing happens is that he goes and he sees that, if we can get our strawberries made into jam that have preservatives in it, then other people get an opportunity to experience our strawberries. Now, it's going to take a little bit of a change to make that to happen. There's going to have to be some things that are added in, some sugar, some other things, and maybe a little enhancement, but it'll still be our strawberry. Well, that's the first stage of creating that simulation. It still has the strawberry in it, but there's additives in it. Well, then later on, that's very successful. And the family's name for the strawberries is known across the nation, and people say, you know what would really help is if you could take that and make it actually into a candy. But in doing so, maybe you could have a little bit of the strawberry there, but it mainly needs to be sugar and other things that are preserved well. There's going to need to sit on the shelf for at least 2 years. So you start to make another compromise. Okay, well, we can do that. We'll find some things that are very closely flavored, but we'll still use our name, the family name on the candy. But there'll still be some essence of strawberry in it. And then the next thing happens. A soda company comes to them and says, you know what we need to really make is strawberry flavored soda. And if we have your name on it and give you a part of the profits, it's really going to work well. So then the family says, well, how much more strawberry is going to be in it? Well, there's not going to be any of your strawberry, but we have the right chemical combination that'll really be close to what the taste of your strawberry was. Okay, well, let's do it. Now all of a sudden you have something that has no resemblance at all in terms of the objective meanings of what it meant to be strawberry now in the soda. Now that young man that went out with his grandfather to the fields, now it's 70 years after that, and he takes his grandson out to the family farm field. Now the grandson loves strawberry soda and he loves the strawberry candy. It's like, Granddad, that's what I love. I love strawberries. He says, well, let's go and try a real strawberry from our farm. So they drive out in the pickup truck, get out to the family farm again. He bends down and takes that strawberry and plucks it, gives it to his grandson and said, now taste what a real strawberry tastes like. And excitedly, the grandson puts it in his mouth and takes a bite. And all of a sudden says, yuck, what is this? Yeah. This is disgusting. And the grandfather says, but that's a real strawberry. He goes, well, this isn't the real strawberry. This isn't what I like in my soda pop or in the cereal that I eat or in the candy that I eat. This tastes nothing like it. Because what you've reached now is something that is a complete simulation. It still has the name of it, but it doesn't have the properties of that whatsoever. The same thing is happening within our churches. Yeah. You have men that are basically now preaching and teaching something that is a simulation of the gospel. It's a simulation of Christianity. You have the same thing happening within the other fields of studies, like within math and within history. You're teaching a simulated something for the purposes of reaching an objective goal that has nothing to do with what the original goals of teaching math, of teaching geography, of practicing your faith has nothing to do with that anymore. It's become something fake. Yeah. That's what we find ourselves in today. And I think you made some very good observations about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, I love the strawberry analogy because I think there's so many ways universally you can apply it to so many different things. Yeah. By the way, simulacra simulation, it's
Jean Baudrillard.
Jean Baudrillard, and that, of course, became kind of that was the book that was represented in the Matrix trilogy, at least in the first one, back in 1998 or 1999.
Jean Baudrillard disavowed himself. He says, that's not what I'm talking about.
Right,
but of course, the book, in the beginning of the movie, that the Keanu Reeves character takes out to hide his floppy disk in, was simulacra and simulation.
That's right, that's right. So I think there are many false representations, and when you have some heterodox belief that sneaks its way in, whether it be critical theory, postmodernism, you name it, some Marxist notion of something, it can assimilate to its host, and then eventually the parasite overtakes the host, and no longer is the host awake or alive or whatever. Instead, you have this other thing that is a false representation.
A vampire ideology.
A vampire ideology, right? And it takes over its host. But then it's like, wait, you're looking pale, you're looking gone or whatever. But no, that actually, the original is dead.
Correct.
And that representation has now taken its place.
Right.
And you can see that with very big institutions. One of those is Disney World.
Yes.
So the founder is dead. Mm-hmm. And so is his vision.
Right.
His vision is also dead. If you want to go back, you want to know what his vision was. I mean, there's an excellent documentary before they cancel it. I don't know if they'll have it on Amazon anymore, but there was a documentary, it was a 2-part documentary that went back and showed how he founded the Walt Disney Corporation as a not just as a entertainment company, but something that was transformative. In the 1950s, after he had reached these peaks of success and he'd bet the whole farm on Snow White during the Great Depression, $7 million in the hole. They came back from that, and he started to reinvent. And then finally, when he was able to create this entertainment company that was also a theme park and everything else, he went back to American history. And the whole idea was to retell American history.
That's right.
But it wasn't hagiography as much as it was, I want the kids who were growing up in the 1950s and the 1960s, with the rise of Marxism in the post sort of World War II, sort of the Soviet Cold War era, to understand, because already you had the greening of America and everything else, who the founders were. And that's what he was doing. So that's when you had Davy Crockett, right, that whole thing, and a whole bunch of other heroes that he launched, and he did the Hall of the Presidents and everything else. That was in order to instill this sort of patriotic sense of the country. Well, now that's all dead. And if you look at the Disney company, I think it's a lot like your strawberry. It's still the Disney Corporation, but it's no longer the founder's vision.
And the thing about it is that Disney was actually, and the Magic Kingdom, Disney World, was actually an example that Baudrillard would provide as a case of a simulacrum. So he would say, well, what it is, it's reality. It's not reality, it's hyper-reality. It's the way things should be. It's, you know, you take the Jungle Cruise ride and it's fake animals that come out on cue and do the same thing every single time. But what you now have is you almost have a simulacrum of the simulacrum, because now what it actually represents, as opposed to what you just said, a way for children of all ages, right, to be able to come in and experience something that gives them a historic understanding and also gives them joy and so forth. Well, now all of a sudden, the main purpose is to deliver a particular kind of ideology. And so if you're not delivering this ideology, and if you're not conformed to it and supporting it, then somehow you're not really part of what the plans of Disney currently are.
That's right. And so that's just that's just one example, right? We can see that with churches, we can see that with denominations, we can see that with institutions, colleges that have folded, right? And I don't just mean financially folded, that their doors are shut. What I mean is they folded on their original mission and their purpose. They're still open for business. Some of these places are still open for business. But their new stock and trade is wokeism, or their new stock and trade is this whole new cultural hegemony that has been forced down our throat. And they're on to whatever the next new thing is. And they're controlled by a board of governors that don't know the founder. It's kind of like the beginning of Exodus. There was a new Pharaoh, and he had forgotten who Joseph was. It's the same exact thing over and over again. So there is a sense in which we have to go back to the beginning. And it requires people like you and what you're doing over at New Discourses and elsewhere to sort of herald what is happening. You have to announce what is going on, and you have to draw attention to it and bring this magnifying glass in. I want to wake people up, though, to this reality. This is the startling reality. You imagine a country and a community that looks and sort of sounds similar to what you've always known, but it's a simulation, a representation of that. And now the new paradigm is something like Man in the High Castle, where Nazism takes over. And it's like, this is America, right? There's the Statue of Liberty, there's the Liberty Bell, there's all these things, but it no longer represents the constitutional republic that we know. It's not America as we know it. So we have all these representations, but no longer is it the founder's vision. No longer is there freedom.
Right, and you brought up the terminology of cultural hegemony, and if you take a look back to Gramsci, who was basically stating many years ago, back in his prison notebooks that were written in the 1920s, is what he would say is that we need to create a counter-hegemony, and that needs to happen, in every institution. Rudi Deutschke many years later would call it the long march through the institutions. which Herbert Marcuse,
Yes.
who wrote One-Dimensional Man, who wrote Eros and Civilization, and as well in the book Counter-Revolution Revolt, basically agrees with Rudi Dutschke. And what he says is, as opposed to us trying to attack all of these institutions, we need to be grafted into them. We need to start to be the best ones who understand how to do data coding. We're the ones who need to be the best businessmen. We're the ones that need to be the best researchers and the best educators, and as well, even within religion. So within that movement, to be able to infuse each one of these different fields with people whose ideology is based upon more of a Marxian view of things, and creating a dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, that leads then to changing the very nature of each one of these organizations, whether it be church, whether it be economic, no matter what it is that you then begin to see this massive shift where, before our lifetimes, you would have institutions that would be institutions, that they would stand for something. Well, it's very rare to find now an institution that isn't in the process of becoming and becoming something that is very different than what the original intention actually was. And even within really strong conservative organizations or really strong conservative ministries, you start to see this creeping of things. And many times it's because of the fact that they just need funding. But along with that funding comes a little bit of a compromise and a little bit more compromise. And each time that you make that next level of compromise, you get that money in, and then you start to set your budgets. And then all of a sudden you get dependent upon this. That's happening within ministries. What's happening within the corporate structure is basically this is the reason why you have organizations like the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum is basically every major world major corporation agreeing that this is the path that we're going to take.
Yeah.
I forget the quote from Goethe that basically says that everything must be conformed to take that lockstep direction all at the same time. No one can compromise in order to make this change happen. And so these changes are happening because of this move into the fourth industrial revolution. And what that basically means is that all of our systems will change. So when we say all of our systems, what are we talking about? We're talking about everything, including our constitutional republic, that needs to change to conform to this vision. So, yes.
So going, because I love, you brought in the dialectic, and I love how you brought in the names Gramsci and Marcuse and the other one, Rudi
Dutschke.
Yes. So you have the antithesis. And I think oftentimes when we're talking even with conservatives, they've forgotten the thesis, right? The original thesis, which is you have to know your own story. What is it that you're conserving? You're conserving the thesis.
Yes.
That's the point.
Yes.
And so here we're at Liberty University training champions for Christ. That is the thesis. They're supposed to go out into the world to fulfill the Great Commission and to excel in every field. Much like the vision of the counter-revolutionaries were trying to do, they were trying to infiltrate and influence culture.
Right.
The culture wars are not dead.
Yes.
We agree on that. There are others, though, that wanted to sing a dirge, that wanted to have a requiem for the culture wars, that wanted to already claim premature defeat. Until we're in the ground, until every Christian we know, under the sun is in the ground, which that will never happen, by the way, the culture wars will not be dead. There's always going to be a struggle. There's always going to be a fight. Is there not?
Yes, and I think that, building on what you just said, we're at a time right now, I'm sure this will be evergreen material, but we're in a time right now where this Bureau of Disinformation has just been introduced.
Right.
So in many ways, yes, we're in a culture war, but the big war now is over objective truth.
Yes.
So if we're being told that we're going to decide, this Bureau is going to decide, much like the Ministry of Truth and Orwell's dystopian vision, is we're going to decide what is truth. But truth is not necessarily objective. It can be subjective in terms of it actually accomplishing what is operational success in their minds. Mm-hmm. So as long as it accomplishes what we need to see happen, that's what's important.
Yeah.
So you'll start to see a lot of this happen within world affairs.
Yes.
Is what we're seeing actually the thing that's going on? Well, it's the subjective truth, it's what is morally true that you're hearing. What about that election result that we just saw? Is that really objective? Well, it's what needs to happen in terms of us being able to accomplish our objectives. So you have this change that's occurring, and for whatever reasons, some people are just not picking up. I know you do. You've understood this for quite a while. And it's something that you see. Then let's talk again about faith. What's happening is you have men who for many years were trusted for truth, let's say. Let's say that they were men that were respected, and among other men that really did stand for truth. But then all of a sudden, there's a change that has happened in the last 10 to 12 years, where these men that you all trusted all of a sudden made the same change at the same time, beginning to bring in concepts such as critical social justice, critical race theory, intersectionality into the Christian faith. To understand what's happening, you have to back away from that and go, well, where else is this happening? Oh, it's happening in the corporate world. Oh, it's actually happening in not just evangelical Christianity, but it's happening in Roman Catholicism. Oh, it's happening in moderate Islam. Oh, Islam, it's happening in Zen Buddhism, all at the same time.
Right.
So when you see this, you go, well, what's actually going on here?
Right.
And so once you begin to see that there's a bigger play happening, maybe you'll start to understand that, no, you need to trust your scriptures.
Yes.
You need to always balance, as a Berean, the things that you're hearing against what the Word of God is actually saying. And I will say, I'm not trying to just build you up, but you've seen these things for many years. And that's one of the reasons I appreciate my friendship with you.
Well, thank you. And I'm so thankful for all the stuff that you're bringing to our attention, and then obviously supplying definition. And I would just say your acute awareness of detail is it's admirable. As I look around, there's so many other people that are oblivious, or they might find the one thing, Mike, but they don't see the whole picture. Right. The Ministry of Disinformation, or whatever it is, it's the Board of Disinformation, right, that was just put in place at the Department of Homeland Security. I'm going to call it the Ministry of Truth.
Yes, we all should.
And I will continue to use that term as a pejorative to describe it. But just what we witnessed, and we don't know when this will air, but just over the past 24 hours, this strange leaking of a Supreme Court verdict that has not yet been rendered officially. All of a sudden, you have barricades going up around the Supreme Court around 10 o'clock last night. One of our writers actually lives in D.C., actually our editor lives in D.C. For the Freedom Center, and was calling me while this was happening. And it could not have been orchestrated any better, right? All of a sudden there's going to be mob pressure being placed upon the justices before the verdict is rendered, and AOC today calling upon Congress to go ahead and vote in a constitutional protection on abortion ahead of this verdict. So you're seeing all this stuff happen, and you say, wait a second, this doesn't just spontaneously happen, it is all orchestrated. Right. And what I want, and this is what Jesus said in Luke chapter 16, the sons of disobedience are more shrewd than the sons of light. We have to understand what is happening. We cannot be naive. We cannot be ignorant. Ignorance may be bliss, but it is not a virtue. And far be it from us as Christians to operate with that level of ignorance in a world that is fallen and sinful and ruled by the serpent.
Yes.
So I think that what we're seeing, I guess the question is, people are seeing bits and pieces of it. Obviously, you need to go back and look at the unification of the whole. But what is it that people are supposed to be doing in an age in which their voice is being canceled, their vote is being canceled, they can't really trust that, currency could be canceled, their jobs could be canceled? What do we do?
Well, I believe there's two things. Or actually, there's many things that you could be doing. But first of all, you need to be educated quickly in order to be able to understand the patterns, precipitating events that happen that then cause a crisis that means that the left has to respond and demand action. This happens constantly. And all these things usually are done in a very rather religious paradigm, if you will. Is that I don't want to use the examples that will get this video banned, but let's just say that you have something that happens worldwide, and you're told that the way that we can fight this is that everybody needs to stay in their homes. or not go to work, and this other crisis that happens, and then you're told that, well, you must wear a new head covering that obscures your face, and you must do these things, and you must keep distance and so forth. And then you're told that you must, for all of us to be able to take care of this, to make sure this never happens again, all of us must take this new medicine that we really haven't had time to test properly and so forth, but you all must take this. And if you don't take it, then you're the one that's actually the problem here.
Right.
And so the same thing that's happened now with abortion is that this thing is leaked last night from apparently Sotomayor's office, apparently. We don't know that to be exactly true just yet, but this is leaked. It's a memo that comes out. Then all of a sudden there's this massive response that something must be done, and it must be done now to protect abortion. And so all of a sudden there's this huge rallying cry of something else, of us versus them, that's happening, as opposed to going through the judicial process, who's going to get people at odds against one another once again. But it will rally those that are on the progressive leftist eugenic side of things.
Right.
And so it's the perfect vehicle to be able to say, do you understand what's at stake? This could happen. It also can give an excuse for people to start demanding that we have additional Supreme Court justices put on the court right now.
Yeah.
And so that push can start as well.
Right.
Because it must be done in order to protect a woman's right to choose.
Yes.
So you have that dynamic that comes into it, which again is forcing something to be done now, because there is a crisis and we must solve the crisis. This is a pattern.
Yeah.
And people have to understand, these patterns when they appear.
And what I would urge anybody kind of listening to this, if they've gone this far, go a little bit further, is not to take everything as though it at face value.
Right. Don't
trust the process. Don't just leave it as, oh, well, that's just coincidence. We're past that now. Yeah. The reality is, now, I'm not saying, I want to be really careful, that these people are demigods they can look into a crystal ball and see the future, right? That's not what we're saying. These people are flawed. They're morally flawed. A lot of them have huge behavioral problems and mental health issues and so on and so forth. I mean, just talking about Klaus Schwab alone, right? There are many, many others that are severely disturbed people. They're also fragile. Just like freedom is fragile, so are tyrants. Tyrants are incredibly fragile people. Just try to criticize them publicly. They can't take it. Just try to expose them publicly. They can't take it. But I would urge people to think more critically, to think more deeply about these things. I remember, Mike, and somebody reminded me about this video that was spliced together where it was all these local news agencies.
Yes,
that were mimicking one another. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of scary. There was no way you could fabricate this video, but it was like hundreds of agencies receiving and reading the same bylines, like at the end when they were signing off.
The same talking points.
Yes, they were identical. There was not one thing. It was almost like Dosen had written the sermon for him.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. But they were repeating the same line over and over and over again, and you think, that is really scary. What else of that news report that night was fully orchestrated, right? So you're the first person to ever tell me about reflexivity. Explaining how basically it's a strategy in which the media is sort of the tail wagging the dog, so to speak, in terms of formulating public awareness and then ultimately the public conscience, right? And so they create all kinds of events, and then the retelling of that history of that event, or they might even be forecasting what's going to happen. I don't know, maybe in the 2020 election cycle, and then they produce those results. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like they are ex nihilo, out of nothing, speaking it into existence.
Rather prescient, yes.
Yes. So explain a little bit maybe about that.
Well, reflexivity is basically creating a feedback loop through constant information. You could just call propaganda. It's basically the same thing that you would call what Pygmalionism was. Rousseau, back in the 1700s, wrote a musical play called Pygmalion. Of course, then you had George Bernard Shaw writing the book Pygmalion, which was known as My Fair Lady. So where you have Henry Higgins, who goes into Covent Garden and finds this Cockney flower girl, and what his job then is in his
I saw
bed.
the movie, by the way. I didn't read the book.
So what he does is he transforms this woman into being something that is pulled off in front of high society as being a very high, fair lady. Even though that's not what she really was, but he pulls it off, and the thing that he creates is a fakery or something that is different and passes it off. Reflexivity uses many of the same kind of concepts, and what it does is it creates the crisis. It creates the thing that you must care about, and it constantly pumps it into the news cycle. So you'll have the updates on your phone for each one of the notification pushes. You'll have the constant news being about whatever the thing is. It'll be whatever you hear on the radio or in talk radio or within the print media. It's the thing that you must care about right now. And so reflexivity uses that technique in order to make sure that it's the only thing that is on your mind. It's the thing that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's always usually embedded with a fertile fallacy. So understanding the fertile fallacy is important too. And basically a fertile fallacy is a lie that has legs. There's a kernel of truth always within the fertile fallacy. There's something that's like, well, yeah, that is true, but it's always wrapped in falsity, something that is another agenda that is meant to be accomplished.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what a fertile fallacy is. That is the intention of pushing what your objective is that isn't really the thing that you have everybody talking about.
Right.
But you have everybody talking about this thing in a way that really confuses the whole matter itself.
Yeah.
But yet something else is being accomplished.
And so there's lots of examples of this. I immediately think about ways in which the left tries to push certain narratives and use things. One of the things that I would say this seminal event that sort of launched this entire sort of SJW, critical social justice theory and so on and so forth, you could say, most people would say, oh yes, it was Ferguson. And that event, I'm not even going to get into breaking down all of that, but it is highly, the narrative surrounding Michael Brown from the very get-go has been falsified again and again and again by the media. The actual report, most people can go and read in terms of how that encounter happened and how the officer was acting in self-defense. But the way in which it was projected is a hands up, don't shoot. Right. And nothing could be further from the truth. That's not how it happened. But that, it doesn't matter. The fertile fallacy is that someone was shot and killed that day. And then from that seminal event, a movement came out from that. And so the details are vague. Most people wouldn't even know now. Now there's the movement that is now represented, but that thing that happened a long time ago, that thing almost becomes that here's what happened on this fateful day, so on, so. But actually, no. We need to go back and look at the details of what really did happen.
Right.
And it didn't. So it becomes a whole new narrative.
And you're told the way you need to think about it.
Correct.
And the way you need to feel about it. Mm-hmm. And so as opposed to the actual thing that happened, what you're supposed to take out of that is then something that demands change. Well, because of this event happening, we must change everything now. This is where you had the defund the police movement that started. And really the defund the police movement was a lot less about just giving police less money as it was actually trying to eliminate law enforcement.
That's right.
So where if you eliminate law enforcement and if all of a sudden your move is to safety, which is where everything's going, well then there's a vacuum from where that law was. There was law and order. Law enforcement was there to preserve the order according to the law.
Right.
If you pull that out, what do you have? Chaos. So you introduce chaos, and now all of a sudden everybody's in this battleground, if you will, in any city, anywhere. And so then there's going to be a demand for peace and for something to be done. That's where then you can reintroduce your solution, which is different than what your original solution, which was law enforcement.
Yeah, this is like Nietzsche played out.
Yes.
Yeah, you kill law and order, this happens. If you kill God, this happens.
Correct.
Which actually Nietzsche in many ways was the opposite of what most people think. He wasn't absolutely a nihilist. Actually, what he was saying is if you do this, this will result. So kind of final thoughts, when you think about this year that we've been into, probably some surprises, but not fully. There's been deviations along the way. So I fully thought, and I'm not saying that it's all over, but that the COVID thing would continue. Almost overnight it stopped and everything became Ukraine. I thought, man, we're going to go into World War III in Ukraine. There's been a lot of public pressure to stay out of that. We're not saying, by the way, and I want to be really clear, that Russian tanks aren't inside of the sovereign state of Ukraine, but there's a lot of other things that are in that scenario that make it very, very difficult to have real-time information to understand. Both sides have probably told some tales and some whoppers that we've seen in the media that haven't been true. You have that, and then you have all of a sudden what happened here at the Supreme Court. What do you predict through the rest of the year? Yeah.
Well, I think this kind of thing is going to continue, and when a movement loses its steam or starts to have significant pushback, you have to change the movement. So if your movement was, here's the way you need to look at Ukraine, and yes, we are for the people. We hate to see what's happening.
Of course, we
to
hate
the people
tyranny.
of Ukraine and the people even in Russia and so forth that are having to deal with this, the destruction and the death it's taking. No one wants that. But what was happening out of this was that precipitating event meant that, all of a sudden we have gas shortages, we have oil shortages, we have food shortages, we have grain shortages, we have fertilizer shortages, which then have a cascading effect of starting a, quote, food crisis everywhere else. Well,
right.
That, again, gives those that are governmentally in control power and the ability to do something. So all of a sudden that can be translated into, the talk of, we're going to need to start talking about rationing.
Yes.
Oh, really? Because now that it begins to if you're thinking logically and if you're someone who thinks consequentially, you're thinking, okay, here we go again. We're going to be forced into doing something that is not the way that we constitutionally do things in the United States. So that's number one. I believe that has a bit run out of steam, and it's become now even an inside joke within the Democratic Party of how this is happening and how upset people are. So you have to change the narrative if that's not popular. So now, what happens with the Supreme Court? How do you rally the troops? How do you rally people that are on your side that are for women's rights or trans rights or for reproductive rights or people who are in favor of eugenics and population control and who want to save the earth and believe that one way that we can save the earth is having less people? All of a sudden you're able to rally those troops and to get them together to start standing for something. On the other side of that is that you then have the people that value life, that value liberty, that value freedom. What your Standing for Freedom Center is all about, that then go, hold on, that's against what we need to let that process take place. But that gives the other side the opportunity to say, this is a crisis, we must do something about it, and everything must change. I'm sure we find ourselves in the beginning right now. I don't know when you're listening to this, but right now this is the beginning of it. By the time that we get to August, September, believe me, there will be more crises that we have to handle, that everything must stop and we must focus on this, and this is the one thing that must change everything. This is going to continue until we stop it. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that people do need to rise up. I'm not talking about some sort of violent way or anything like that, but we need to get back into the elective process. We need to hold corporations responsible that have been acting more like a State Department. We need to hold social media responsible. We need to hold our government officials responsible, including those that we've elected in that are Republicans that are doing nothing about the Bureau of Disinformation. And we need to say to them, this is the Constitution, this is our nation, this is what we're founded on. We need to make sure that each one of them is held accountable for what's happening right now. But you must focus everything that you're doing right now on two things. I'm a Christian. I believe trust and faith in God, number one. Number two, everything must be put into this effort to change the direction of where we're going right now. Everything. We must win. There can be no lose in this at all. If we lose, and if the authoritarians actually assume complete control over everything, this is a black hole that'll be very difficult to get out of.
Yeah. No, I agree, and it could be the thing that defines the next 100 or 200 or 300 years. I mean, it could be that very moment where you'd say, that was the moment we lost liberty.
Yeah.
I don't believe we lose it forever. I mean, I have a book that I read that shows who wins at the very, very end.
Yes.
We have to understand that freedom, first and foremost, is not a political right.
Right.
Freedom is spiritual first. It comes from Christ. When all of a sudden you have found freedom in Christ, then it spills over into culture and then finally politics. I believe 1776 was the height in many ways of all the things that the Protestant Reformation brought to bear on culture and society. It was that moment where we reached a crescendo where that happened. And had not all the forebears had gone before, had they not done what they did in order to produce that great document, we would not have the kind of country we have today. And I think this is the last gasp of air. I think we're living on borrowed capital in many ways. And this sort of Rousseauian influence in politics, most Americans today look like 1790s Paris, France, rather than 1776 Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Except for, say, folks that are listening to this, or you or me, who actually understand the American experiment and can appreciate where it comes from. But I think the encouragement is this, and I would just say, just to echo in your words, we have to do something. We must win. Freedom is fragile, so is tyranny. If you stand up, they will back down.
Absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, I think we're willing to die for it.
That's right.
I don't believe they are. So I really appreciate, by the way, you coming and jumping on. I appreciate everything you're doing at New Discourses. By the way,
Sovereign Nations more so. James Lindsay's New Discourses. Big time, yes.
That's right. Both things, Sovereign Nations, and check them both out. Yes. The definitions, by the way, in New Discourses, fantastic.
Oh, translations for the Wokish.
That's right. It's wonderful. So appreciate all you're doing to call attention to this and persevere, press on.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.